December 1944 presses down on Western Europe with a weight that feels physical. Snow settles over the Ardennes forests, thick and unmoving, muting sound and sight alike. Roads narrow into icy corridors. Villages disappear under white roofs and frozen silence. For months, Allied command has spoken of momentum, of inevitability, of an enemy in retreat. But here, in this terrain, certainty begins to fracture. Intelligence reports arrive unevenly. Some are dismissed as exaggerated. Others contradict one another. German units are believed to be depleted, short on fuel, short on men, short on resolve. Yet movement is detected. Rail lines east of the Rhine hum with activity. Columns shift at night. Radios carry fragments of intercepted traffic, sharp and urgent. The information does not yet cohere, but unease spreads through headquarters. At 12th Army Group, Omar Bradley studies maps that have not changed in weeks. Front lines are drawn in confident arcs. The Ardennes sector is thinly held, considered unsuitable for a major offensive. American divisions rest there, recovering from months of fighting. New units rotate in, inexperienced but grateful for quiet. The forest is treated as a buffer, a pause in the war's rhythm. Bradley understands the risk of assumptions. He has built his command on restraint, on balance, on conserving lives while advancing objectives. The broad front strategy reflects that philosophy. Hold everywhere. Push steadily. Avoid reckless thrusts. It has worked so far. Paris is free. The German army has fallen back again and again. Yet the Ardennes remains an open question on his maps, a place marked more by habit than certainty. Further south, George S. Patton commands Third Army. His headquarters is louder, sharper, charged with motion. Patton does not wait comfortably. He distrusts stillness. To him, pauses invite danger. He pushes his staff relentlessly, demanding readiness even when nothing appears imminent. He speaks often of surprise, of speed, of the enemy's capacity to strike when least expected. Patton's view of the war differs from Bradley's in tone and execution, but not in purpose. He believes in pressure, in forcing decisions, in denying the enemy time. Where Bradley calculates balance, Patton seeks dominance. The contrast is known to both men, acknowledged without being spoken aloud. Their relationship is professional, shaped by respect and friction in equal measure. On December 16th, the forest breaks its silence. Artillery erupts along a wide front before dawn. The sound rolls through valleys and trees, echoing in ways that confuse distance and direction. American positions are hit without warning. Communication lines snap. Units wake into chaos, some cut off within minutes. German infantry advances behind the barrage, moving through fog and snow, using terrain that had concealed them for weeks. Reports flood in. Bradley's staff struggles to assemble a coherent picture. Entire regiments are missing from the map, swallowed by weather and disruption. Command posts lose contact with forward elements. Roads clog with refugees, retreating units, and vehicles abandoned in ditches. The German offensive, long thought impossible, is unmistakably real. Bradley absorbs the information without outward reaction. He asks for confirmations. He requests timelines. He looks for the main effort, the axis that will define the enemy's intent. The scope of the attack grows by the hour. This is not a local counterstrike. It is a full-scale gamble. At Third Army headquarters, Patton receives the same news. His response is immediate. He orders staff officers to revise movement tables, to assess road conditions northward, to identify units that can be turned without delay. He does not yet have orders to move, but he anticipates them. He assumes the crisis will demand action, and he prepares accordingly. By midday, it is clear that the German thrust is driving west, aiming to split Allied lines and seize crossings over the Meuse. If successful, the offensive could isolate armies, disrupt supply, and force a political reckoning none of the Allied leaders are prepared to face. The stakes sharpen rapidly. Bradley faces decisions that will define the winter. Reserves are limited. Weather grounds air support. The enemy holds the initiative. He weighs whether to pull forces from the north or the south, whether to concede ground to gain time, whether to risk exposure elsewhere to contain the breakthrough. Every option carries cost. Patton waits for call, But he does not wait idly. He gathers his commanders and speaks plainly. A change of direction may be required. Speed will matter. Discipline will matter more. He reminds them that orders, when they come, will not allow for hesitation. As daylight fades, the Ardennes burns with scattered fires beneath falling snow. The German advance continues to widen the bulge in the Allied line. For the first time in months, confidence gives way to urgency at the highest levels of command. The war, which had seemed to be narrowing toward an end, suddenly opens again into uncertainty. And within that uncertainty, the choices made in the coming hours will determine whether the Allied flank bends, breaks, or holds. Night brings no relief. Snow thickens, and with it the confusion. Reports arrive late, or not at all. Some units fight blind, unsure where their neighbors stand or whether support still exists. German armor pushes through gaps that should not be there, using captured fuel, bypassing strong points, leaving pockets of resistance behind to be dealt with later. The offensive gains momentum not because it is flawless, but because it is bold. At 12th Army Group, Bradley's headquarters becomes a center of constant motion. Phones ring without pause. Maps are updated, erased, and redrawn. The clean lines of previous weeks dissolve into jagged edges. The Ardennes sector, once quiet, now dominates every discussion. Bradley listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, it is measured, stripped of excess. He orders divisions to hold where possible, to delay where holding is impossible. Time becomes the most valuable resource. The weather works against him. Low clouds and snow-ground Allied aircraft, removing the advantage that has defined much of the campaign. Without air support, German movements are harder to track and harder to disrupt. Roads that Allied planners assumed would be controlled from the air now belong to whoever can reach them first. Bradley recognizes the pattern emerging from fragmentary intelligence. The enemy is driving toward the Meuse, seeking a rupture large enough to force a strategic crisis. He understands what is at stake. If the Germans reach the river in strength, the Allied front could split. Supply lines would be thrown into chaos. Political pressure would follow military failure. He considers his options. Northern reserves are committed. British forces are stretched. The center is under direct threat. That leaves the South. Bradley turns his attention to Third Army. Patton's headquarters is already operating, as if a decision has been made. Staff officers track unit locations with urgency. Columns are identified that can pivot north without unraveling the southern front. Engineers assess bridges and road capacity. Traffic control plans are drafted and revised repeatedly as new information arrives. Patton moves through the room, stopping at maps, questioning officers, issuing short directives. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. His intent is clear. If ordered, Third Army will turn. Not gradually, not cautiously. It will pivot in force. The scale of such a maneuver is enormous. Entire corps would have to change direction in winter conditions, on limited roads, under the constant threat of congestion and breakdown. Fuel, ammunition, food, medical support, all would have to follow. A delay of hours could mean failure. Bradley calls Patton. The exchange is direct. There is no need for elaborate explanation. The situation speaks for itself. Bradley outlines the crisis to the north and the need for immediate relief. Patton responds without hesitation. He states that plans are already in motion. He commits to attacking north within days, not weeks. The confidence is not theatrical. It is operational. Patton has prepared for this kind of moment since the campaign began. He has kept his army flexible, trained to move fast, trained to adapt. Now that preparation is about to be tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. As orders begin to flow, Third Army starts to turn. Vehicles reverse direction. March tables are rewritten. Units that were preparing for offensive action eastward now face frozen roads and an enemy pressing hard from the north. Discipline becomes as critical as speed. A single stalled column could ripple into catastrophe. In the Ardennes, American units fight, delaying actions village by village. They slow the German advance at crossroads, at bridges, at narrow forest roads. Each hour bought is paid for with casualties. Some formations are surrounded. Others fall back in disorder. The front bends but does not collapse. Bradley watches the map with growing intensity. He knows that relief is coming, but he also knows that timing will decide everything. If Patton arrives too late, the damage may already be irreversible. If he arrives too soon without coordination, he risks exposing his own flank. The crisis deepens as German forces press westward. The bulge grows more pronounced. Allied commanders at every level feel the pressure of decisions that cannot be undone. Somewhere between snow-covered roads and crowded command rooms, the balance of the campaign begins to hinge on movement, on whether one army can turn fast enough, and whether leadership under strain can translate resolve into action before the window closes. The third day of the offensive strips away any remaining illusion of control. German spearheads push deeper, their advance uneven but relentless. Some columns stall against stubborn resistance. Others slip through seams that should have been closed. The front no longer resembles a line. It is a shifting mass of contact points, gaps, and isolated units, holding on without certainty of relief. Bradley confronts the limits of command at this scale. Orders issued hours earlier arrive too late to match reality. Subordinate commanders make decisions on instinct, on fragmentary information, on what they can see through snow and smoke. Bradley accepts this loss of precision. He adjusts intent rather than detail. Hold critical roads. Deny river crossings. By time, he understands that the crisis is no longer only tactical. It is psychological. The German gamble depends on shock, on convincing Allied commanders that the situation is slipping beyond recovery. Bradley refuses to concede that ground. He keeps his language steady. He avoids dramatic signals that could spread panic. The structure of command must hold, even if the front does not. Patton's army continues its turn northward. The maneuver unfolds across hundreds of miles of road. Traffic control points work through the night. Military police reroute columns. Brake jams. Clear wrecks. Engines freeze. Men push vehicles by hand. Units arrive late, but they arrive intact. The pace is slower than Patton would prefer, faster than most had believed possible. Patton remains focused on the objective ahead, rather than the obstacles beneath his feet. He pressures his corps commanders to maintain momentum. He demands updates, not explanations. When reports emphasize difficulty, he cuts them short and asks what is being done to overcome it. The tone is not reckless. It is relentless. The contrast in leadership styles becomes more apparent as the days pass. Bradley manages the crisis by containment, by absorbing pressure and redistributing strength. Patton seeks resolution through movement, through a decisive blow that will force the enemy to react. Both approaches are necessary. Neither alone is sufficient. Communication between their headquarters tightens. Messages grow shorter, more precise. There is no room for misunderstanding. Bradley defines the space that must be held. Patton defines the force that will move into it. The coordination is imperfect, but it is functional. The alternative is unacceptable. At the center of the bulge, Bastogne becomes a focal point. Roads converge there, making it a prize neither side can ignore. American forces dig in as German units surround the town. Supplies dwindle. Weather keeps aircraft grounded. The situation hardens into a test of endurance. Bradley recognizes Bastogne's importance, but does not allow it to distort his broader view. Relief is necessary, but not at the cost of exposing other sectors. He balances pressure from subordinates who demand immediate action with the realities of distance and terrain. His decisions slow the enemy without committing prematurely. Patton sees Bastogne differently. To him, it is the hinge. He redirects his effort toward it, aligning his northward attack to strike the German flank and open the road. The decision narrows his focus and increases risk, but also offers clarity. A single objective concentrates energy and purpose. As Third Army approaches contact, the war shifts again. The German advance begins to feel resistance not just from fixed positions, but from an approaching force that threatens its side. German commanders divert units to respond, stretching already limited fuel and supply. The offensive loses coherence as it gains depth. Weather begins to change. Clouds thin. Allied aircraft return in growing numbers. Roads once hidden from the air become exposed. German columns suffer losses they cannot easily replace. Momentum slows. Bradley observes the shift with cautious optimism. He does not declare victory. He knows how quickly conditions can reverse. But the pattern on the map begins to stabilize. The bulge stops expanding. Pressure at the Meuse eases. Patton's forward units engage the enemy under difficult conditions. Fighting is close, methodical, costly. Progress is measured in miles, sometimes in yards. The promise of a swift breakthrough gives way to the reality of winter combat against a determined foe. Still, movement continues. Relief forces draw closer to Bastogne. The coordination between armies tightens further, shaped by necessity rather than design. Decisions made days earlier begin to converge toward a single outcome. The crisis is not yet resolved. Losses continue to mount. The enemy remains dangerous. But the initiative, which had shifted so suddenly, begins to slip back. What had been a desperate effort to contain disaster now edges toward the possibility of reversal, driven by leadership that adapts under pressure rather than yielding to it. By late December, the offensive has lost its initial violence, but not its danger. German units remain entrenched along the bulge, fighting to preserve what they have gained. Their objectives have narrowed. What began as a drive to Meuse has become an effort to avoid encirclement and collapse. The weather clears further, and with it the battlefield becomes more exposed, more lethal. Bradley sees the opportunity taking shape. With the German advance stalled, coordination between Allied forces becomes a priority. He works to align movements from north and south, closing the bulge rather than simply containing it. The emphasis shifts from survival to pressure. Every available formation is repositioned to tighten the noose. This phase demands precision. Too much haste risks fratricide or overextension. Too much caution allows the enemy to stabilize. Bradley balances both, issuing clear objectives and limiting unnecessary maneuver. His control reasserts itself not through dramatic orders, but through steady synchronization. Patton's army drives forward into the southern shoulder of the bulge. Progress is slow, ground taken at significant cost. German defenses are layered, anchored to villages and ridgelines. Patton pushes the commanders to maintain contact, to deny the enemy time to regroup. He accepts casualties as a price of momentum, but he does not accept delay without cause. At Bastogne, the pressure finally breaks. Relief columns reach the perimeter, opening the road and restoring supply. The town holds, battered but intact. The symbolic weight of the moment is not lost on either commander. What had been a potential disaster point becomes a marker of resilience. The German response is increasingly reactive. Fuel shortages cripple mobility. Units fight in place, unable to maneuver as intended. Air attacks disrupt supply routes. Artillery support diminishes. The offensive, conceived as a decisive gamble, now bleeds resources it cannot afford to lose. Patton senses a shift and presses harder. He orders continued attacks despite exhaustion and weather. His objective is no longer just relief, but exploitation. He seeks to turn the German retreat into a rout, to ensure the enemy cannot simply withdraw and reset. Bradley tempers that impulse. He approves advances that serve the broader plan and restrains those that threaten balance. The exchange between the two commanders remains professional, occasionally tense, always grounded in the reality of shared stakes. Their differing instincts converge on the same result: sustained pressure without collapse. Fighting intensifies as Allied forces from the north begin to push south. The gap narrows. German units find themselves squeezed between converging fronts. Command and control deteriorates. Orders conflict or arrive too late. Resistance hardens in isolated pockets, but cohesion fades. The climax of the campaign does not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It unfolds through accumulated decisions, through miles regained and roads reopened. The bulge contracts under constant strain. What had threatened to break the Allied line now becomes a liability for the attacker. Bradley watches the map return to something resembling order. The jagged edges smooth. The crisis that once dominated every calculation recedes, replaced by the familiar demands of sustained offensive operations. He does not dwell on relief. There is still work to be done. Patton continues to push until higher command reins him in. His army has done what was required, and more. The risk now lies in exhaustion rather than inertia. He accepts the limits reluctantly, aware that opportunity has a shelf life, but also that armies cannot run on will alone. As December draws to a close, the outcome is no longer in doubt. The German offensive has failed. The costs have been high on all sides, but the Allied flank holds. The winter crisis that threatened to reshape the war instead exposes the limits of the enemy's final gamble. What remains is a reckoning of losses, of lessons, and of the leadership that carried the Allied command through its most dangerous moment in the West. January arrives without ceremony. The snow remains, but the sense of emergency does not. What defined the Ardennes in December was urgency. What defines it now is consequence. The front stabilizes, and with stability comes assessment. The Allied line stands intact, though scarred. The German army withdraws into positions it can no longer afford to abandon. Bradley turns his attention to consolidation. Units are reorganized. Gaps are filled. Command structures settle back into rhythm. The crisis has passed, but its imprint remains visible in casualty lists and exhausted formations. Bradley measures success not in dramatic reversal, but in the fact that the front never shattered. The broad front holds because it bent without breaking. Patton reviews the performance of Third Army with a different lens. He sees speed proven under the worst conditions. He sees preparation validated. He also sees cost. Losses weigh on him, even if he rarely speaks of them. The northward turn, executed in winter under pressure, becomes a reference point for what disciplined mobility can achieve when leadership commits without hesitation. The relationship between the two commanders emerges altered but reinforced. Their methods remain distinct. Bradley continues to emphasize balance, coordination, and restraint. Patton continues to value momentum and decisive action. Yet the Ardennes confirms that their differences are not weaknesses when aligned toward a shared objective. They are complementary forces within a single command structure. Higher command absorbs the lesson as well. The crisis exposes vulnerabilities in intelligence assessment, in assumptions about enemy capacity, and in the dangers of complacency. It also demonstrates resilience. Units that should have collapsed held long enough. Commanders under pressure made decisions that accepted risk without surrendering control. For the American public, the Ardennes becomes known as the Battle of Bulge, a name that captures shape more than meaning. Within the command tents and headquarters rooms, it is remembered differently. It is remembered as a moment when failure was plausible, when victory was not assured by momentum alone. Patton's role in that memory is defined by movement. He did not stop the offensive by himself, but his action prevented it from becoming irreversible. The speed of Third Army's turn, the willingness to commit fully, changes the geometry of the battle. The Allied flank is not saved by brilliance alone, but by readiness applied at the moment it mattered most. Bradley's role is defined by containment and judgment. He absorbs the shock without overreaction. He identifies where strength can be applied without unraveling the rest of the front. His decisions create the space in which Patton's movement can succeed. Without that balance, speed would have led to exposure rather than relief. The Ardennes does not end the war. It delays the inevitable advance into Germany and increases the cost of final victory. But it removes the last credible chance for the German army to alter the outcome in the West. From this point forward, the direction is fixed. As winter grinds on, the Allies resume their advance with renewed caution and hardened resolve. The force recedes into memory, but the lesson remains clear. Leadership under pressure does not announce itself with certainty. It reveals itself in decisions made when information is incomplete, time is short, and the margin for error has vanished. In that winter, on frozen roads and crowded maps, the Allied flank holds, not because disaster was impossible, but because it was confronted without hesitation and managed without illusion.